Autumn 1560. A body at the foot of the stairs, neck broken. This was no accident. It was a political detonation that threatened to incinerate the throne of Elizabeth I. Welcome to Cursed Chambers, where we discover that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't steel, but flesh. At the epicenter was a 25-year-old queen ruling a tattered kingdom, armed with only a razor-sharp intellect and a dangerously empty womb. The powerful men around her all wanted to fill that void. They wanted a husband to control her, an heir to own the kingdom. But they never expected she would turn her own body into the ultimate weapon. They tell stories of the Virgin Queen. We will tell you about her game of life and death, where marriage proposals were declarations of war, flirtations were spy codes, and her bedchamber was the power center of all Europe. Tonight we conduct a political autopsy. Forget the love stories. The truth is far more brutal and brilliant. The story you think you know is a lie. Was she a political genius or a woman cornered by the system itself? Give us your verdict in the comments and hit subscribe to unlock more of history's cursed chambers together. Here is the full script for Part 2, expanded to approximately 1,500 words and written in the dramatic forensic style of Cursed Chambers based on the revised outline. So you think you understand pressure, a deadline at work. An exam you haven't studied for, that's nothing. That's a gentle summer breeze. We are about to enter a room where the pressure isn't just psychological, it's atmospheric. A room where the very air is weaponized, where a nation's anxieties are funneled into the mind of a single woman, and where the temperature is about to rise degree by insidious degree. This is the world Elizabeth inherited, a world that believed an unmarried queen was not just a political problem, but a violation of nature. And we're going to watch them turn up the heat so slowly, so politely, that even the victim barely noticed she was being boiled alive. The expectation is simple, as natural as breathing a queen must marry. A kingdom needs an heir. This isn't tyranny, it's biology, it's tradition, it's just the way things are. The pressure starts not with a threat, but with a portfolio, a delivery. Imagine a long, drafty gallery in Whitehall Palace. Elizabeth in her mid-20s walks down the hall, but she calls it the cattle market, because on the walls, hung in heavy gilt frames, are the faces of her suitors. Prince Eric of Sweden looking perpetually surprised. Archduke Charles of Austria with the first hint of that infamous Habsburg jaw. The Duke of Anjou, a boy who hasn't even started shaving. They arrive by the dozen, these canvases delivered by ambassadors who act less like diplomats and more like high-class slave traders. Let's invent a scene, but one that records show happened in spirit over and over. A Spanish envoy, all velvet and false smiles, stands before her. He doesn't speak of treaties or territories. He gestures to a new portrait of King Philip. "Your Majesty," he purrs. Observe the strength in the king's jaw, perfect for command. His legs strong from the hunt, a sign of vigor. He has already produced a fine heir. His body is a proven vessel for a powerful dynasty. He is selling his king like a prized stallion. And Elizabeth must stand there, nod, and compliment the artist's use of color. She must admire the depiction of the hand that could one day own her, the eyes that would watch her for signs of pregnancy, the legs that would symbolically stand over her nation. Every portrait is a cage. Every compliment is a negotiation with her own extinction. This is the baseline, a parade of potential masters, a polite bureaucratic insult that she is incomplete. It's just business. The water is fine, but personal annoyance is not a political crisis. To get there, you need paperwork. You need institutions. The mercury begins to rise when the vague expectations of the court are forged into the official demands of the state. The water is no longer just pleasant. It's a warm, cloying bath you can't get out of. The Parliament of 1559. Picture it. Elizabeth is on her throne, the crown still new on her head. And before her stands the Speaker of the House. Let's call him Sir Giles, a man whose face looks like a wrinkled potato, his voice booming with the self-importance of a petty god. He is not requesting. He is lecturing a 25-year-old queen on the functions of her own body in front of every powerful man in England. "Your Majesty," he intones the words dripping with condescending piety. This loyal house, in its humble wisdom, implores you to consider the fruitfulness with which God might bless this kingdom. The security of our realm, the future of our faith, rests upon the hope of an issue from your royal person. An empty throne invites chaos, a barren queen. He lets the word hang in the air. Barren, not childless. Barren, an agricultural term, a word for useless soil. This is public shaming disguised as political procedure. Her womb is no longer her own. It is a matter of public record, a national asset she is failing to properly exploit. And Elizabeth must sit there, the silk of her gown suddenly feeling like a straitjacket, the jewels around her neck cold as iron. She cannot scream. She cannot rage. She must smile, a perfect porcelain smile, and thank them for their loyal concern. She can feel their eyes on her, hundreds of them, assessing, judging, calculating. Some are sympathetic, most are impatient. All of them see her not as their sovereign, but as a biological problem that needs to be solved. The polite request has become a formal, documented demand. The door to the chamber has just been locked from the outside. With the pressure now institutionalized, the court begins to fracture. It's no longer just the queen must marry. It's the queen must marry him. Factions form like blood clots in the arteries of the palace. The Spanish faction, the French faction, and most dangerously, the English faction, Dudley's faction. Her friendship with Robert Dudley, a bond forged in the prison of the Tower years ago, now becomes a liability. A comfort becomes a cancer. Every private conversation is scrutinized. Every shared glance is interpreted as a policy decision. The whispers turn into a low hiss that follows them everywhere. Are they lovers? Did he kill his wife for her? Will she make that stable boy a king? The palace corridors become a battleground. Imagine a torchlit hallway after a long night of feasting and wine. A courtier loyal to the Duke of Norfolk, who favors a Spanish alliance, deliberately bumps into one of Dudley's men. An insult is muttered. Better a Spanish lion than an English dog on the throne. Steel whispers as it's drawn from the scabbard. It's not a duel, it's a drunken, pathetic scuffle, but it's a symptom of the disease. The guards separate them, but the news travels faster than a fire, and Elizabeth has to act. She summons Dudley to her private chambers. But this is not a meeting of friends. It is a reckoning. She must publicly reprimand him, distance herself from his cause for the good of the realm. She must take her oldest, truest friend and wound him in front of their enemies, just to prove she is not his pawn. The personal has become political. The political has become poisonous. Her own heart is now just another piece on the chessboard, and she is being forced to sacrifice it herself. The simmering threat of internal factions explodes into the reality of an external existential crisis. And her name is Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary isn't just a rival claimant. She is everything Elizabeth is not: Catholic, charming, and most critically fertile. She has a son, James. Her womb isn't a national debate. It's a biological fact, a living, breathing heir. Mary's fertility is not a private matter. It is a ticking time bomb strapped to the hull of England. Every day Elizabeth remains unmarried and childless, the ticking gets louder. The plots begin. The Ridolfi plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Babington plot. All of them aim to kill Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. They are not just attempts at assassination. They are acts of biological warfare. The goal is to replace the sterile queen with the fruitful one. Then comes the moment of truth. Her spymaster Francis Walsingham brings her the proof, the intercepted letters of the Babington plot, Mary's own handwriting sealing her consent to Elizabeth's assassination. Elizabeth stares at the coded papers, but what she sees is not just treason. She sees a death sentence delivered by another woman's fertility. She sees the brutal final logic of her situation. As long as Mary lives, Elizabeth is temporary. As long as Mary's son lives, Elizabeth's entire reign is just a placeholder. Her council, her parliament, her people, they all demand one thing: death. The signing of the warrant is the most agonizing decision of her life. Imagine her, late at night in her chambers, the document on the desk before her. The quill feels impossibly heavy. She sees Mary's face not as a rival, but as a cousin, another woman trapped in the same brutal game. She sees Mary holding her infant son, and she knows she must do it. The act of signing is not justice. It is a terrible, sterile surgery on the body of the state. A barren queen with a pen stroke like a scalpel, removing her fertile rival to ensure her own survival. The water is boiling over, scalding everyone. She has survived. She is supreme. She is utterly terrifyingly alone. You didn't notice the temperature rising, did you? Because the label stayed so very polite. It was always about duty, security, and the good of the realm. But in the end, it was about one thing: a system built by men for men that could not tolerate a woman ruling on her own terms. And it would stop at nothing to force her to submit. What they didn't count on was that she would learn to use their fire to forge her own weapons. Having survived the boiling pot of political expectation, Elizabeth did not emerge unscathed. She emerged tempered, hardened, and with a terrifying new understanding of power. The young, hopeful queen was gone, burned away by the pressures we've just witnessed. In her place stood something far more formidable, a strategist who had learned the most brutal of lessons. If the world insisted on treating her body as a battlefield, then she would become its greatest general. She would turn the very thing they sought to control, her heart, her hand in marriage, her womb, into a sophisticated arsenal. What follows is not a story of romance. It is the story of a 40-year war, waged not with armies, but with whispers, promises, and the carefully calculated deployment of desire. Every great strategist has a formative trauma, a moment where the rules of the game are burned into their soul. For Elizabeth, that moment arrived on a cold September day in 1560. The name of the trauma was Amy Robsart. Before the news arrived, imagine a rare moment of peace, a stolen hour in a private garden at Hampton Court. Elizabeth is with Robert Dudley, her Robin. They are laughing. For a moment, she is not the queen. She is just Elizabeth. He is not the master of the horse. He is just Robert. The air is filled with the scent of late-blooming roses and the impossible dream of a normal life. It is the last moment of its kind she will ever have. A courtier interrupts, his face pale, his bow clumsy with urgency. He carries a dispatch. As Elizabeth reads it, the color drains from her face. Amy Robsart Dudley's wife is dead. A fall down a short flight of stairs, a broken neck, an accident. And in that horrifying suspended moment, a single treacherous thought flashes through her mind, a thought so shameful she would never admit it to another living soul. He's free. The thought is immediately murdered by the one that follows, and we are damned. Before she can even process her grief for the woman or her complex forbidden hope, the door to her chamber opens. It is not a friend who enters. It is her chief minister, William Cecil. His face is a mask of grim calculation. He does not offer condolences. He does not ask after her heart. He performs a political autopsy on the situation. Your Majesty, he begins, his voice as dry as old parchment. The Spanish ambassador will hear of this by nightfall. The French will have their own version by morning. The word murder is already being whispered in the corridors. Your relationship with Lord Dudley is now a matter of national security. We must formulate a response that prioritizes the stability of the crown. Your personal feelings are a secondary concern. And there it is, the betrayal. It wasn't from Dudley. It was from the system she commanded. The system that told her in no uncertain terms that her love was not a feeling, but a political crisis. Her grief was not a process, but a liability. Her heart was not her own, but a piece of state machinery that was now malfunctioning. In that cold, sterile chamber, Elizabeth the woman died, and Elizabeth the queen took full, terrifying command. A sensible person would have banished Dudley and ended the scandal. Elizabeth did not. She had learned something far more valuable. Love was a weakness that could be used against you, but the promise of love, the endlessly dangled possibility of it, that was the most powerful weapon in the world, and she was about to master its use. What followed was not a reign, but a performance, a magnificent 2-decade-long theatrical production we can call the marriage game. The stage was Europe. The audience was every king and prince from Madrid to Vienna, and the star, the playwright, and the director was Elizabeth. Having learned that a real lover was a political liability, she decided to invent a series of fictional ones. Her greatest co-star in this drama was Francois the Duke of Anjou, a pockmarked, diminutive French prince nearly half her age. She called him her little frog. For 7 years, she convinced the world she was seriously considering marrying him. It was the most elaborate and successful piece of diplomatic catfishing in history. Imagine the scenes she directed. A state banquet at Whitehall. The French delegation is in attendance. The air is thick with tension. Is this it? Will she finally choose an heir and an ally? Elizabeth enters, and all eyes are on her. She is playing the part of a woman wrestling with her heart. She glides over to the French ambassador, a man famed for his cynicism. "Your master, the Duke," she says, her voice a low murmur, just loud enough for those nearby to hear his letters. "They speak to a part of me I thought long dead. A queen should not have such feelings." And yet, she lets her hand laden with rings brush against his sleeve, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. It's a masterful performance. The ambassador, a man who has seen empires rise and fall, is captivated. He would later write back to the French court that the queen was hopelessly besotted, her mind clouded by a passion she could no longer deny. Now cut to the real Elizabeth. 2 hours later, she is in the Spartan map-lined office of her spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham. The gown is gone, the jewels are gone. The lovesick expression has been replaced by a gaze of pure, cold analysis. "Did he take the bait?" she asks, her voice clipped, devoid of all emotion. Walsingham, a man who trusts nothing but shadows, allows himself a thin smile. Hook, line, and sinker. "Your Majesty." The French believe a wedding is imminent. They are preparing to break their treaty with Spain, and the Spanish ambassador is panicking. He is convinced you are about to create an Anglo-French alliance that will destroy him. He is begging King Philip for concessions. For 7 years, she played this game. She danced with French envoys, wrote flirtatious letters, even allowed a wedding treaty to be drafted. She used the illusion of her body, the promise of her womb, to hold the two great Catholic powers of Europe at bay. She pitted them against each other, using herself as the prize, in a contest that was never meant to have a winner. It was exhausting, dangerous, and utterly brilliant. She was turning her greatest vulnerability into a shield and a sword. But a performance cannot last forever. Eventually, the audience grows restless and the actors begin to forget their lines. What happens when you offer the world a prize that is never for sale? You invite them to try and take it by force. As the years passed, the great game of international marriage faded. The threat of the Spanish Armada came and went. Elizabeth grew older, and the myth of the Virgin Queen, married only to her kingdom, solidified. But the silence in her heart, the space a husband and son might have filled, remained. And into that void stepped the last and most tragic of her great loves, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. He was not her lover. He was her creation. The handsome, dashing, arrogant stepson of her first love, Robert Dudley. She doted on him, promoted him, forgave his insolence. He was the son she never had, a living symbol of the youth and vigor that was leaving her. She saw in him a reflection of the man she perhaps should have married, and she showered him with the affection that had been politically dammed up for decades. But she made a fatal error. She taught him he was special, but she never taught him he was second. Essex, puffed up with a pride she had inflated, began to mistake her maternal affection for weakness. He saw an old woman, not the unbreachable fortress she had become. He believed the power she gave him was his by right, not by her royal grace. The rebellion of 1601 was not just an act of treason. It was a Frankenstein moment. The monster she had created, nurtured by her own lonely heart, had turned on its creator. It was a pathetic, ill-conceived coup that was over in a day. But its psychological impact was devastating. It was the ultimate betrayal, not by a suitor or a foreign king, but by the one man she had allowed into the last guarded chambers of her heart. And so it came to the final scene. A late cold night in the Palace of Whitehall. Elizabeth sits alone at her desk. Before her is a single document. The death warrant for Robert Devereux. This is the last and most terrible price of her strategy. She picks up the quill. Her hand, usually so steady, trembles. She is not just signing away a traitor. She is amputating the last remnant of her personal self to save the body of the state. She sees his young, handsome face, the way he used to make her laugh. She sees the boy she had hoped would guard her legacy, and she dips the pen in the ink. As she signs her name, Elizabeth R., the signature is as sharp and merciless as an executioner's axe. She looks up her own reflection, staring back from the black void of the window pane. An old woman, her face a mask of white makeup, utterly alone and utterly victorious. A single cold tear escapes, cutting a clean, dark path through the powder on her cheek. She had outlived them all. Her suitors, her rivals, her enemies, even her own heart. She had secured her throne, saved her kingdom, and built a legend. But as the candle flickered, casting long shadows across the empty room, the final silent question remained: was the victory worth the price? We have walked through the wreckage of a life. We've witnessed the political assassination of a young woman's heart. We've sat through a 7-year masquerade that held a continent hostage. We've watched a queen amputate the last piece of her affection to secure her throne. The narrative is one of chaos, betrayal, and lonely, brutal survival. It looks like a long, messy series of emotional reactions to intolerable pressure. But was it chaos, or was it control? To answer that, we must leave the narrative behind. The story is what they want you to see. The mechanism is what is real. It is time to step out of the grand theater of history and into the cold, sterile light of the autopsy room. It is time to open the file. Let's begin the autopsy. First, we must acknowledge the official story. The narrative that has been cemented by 4 centuries of hostile propaganda, romantic fiction, and lazy history. It goes like this: Elizabeth I was a monarch ruled by emotion, a flighty, indecisive woman who simply couldn't choose a husband. Her dangerous infatuation with Robert Dudley nearly cost her the throne. Her female vanity made her a fool in the prolonged courtship with the Duke of Anjou. Her profound loneliness led her to elevate the traitorous Earl of Essex to a position he did not deserve. In short, the official story is that she was a queen incapable of separating the matters of her heart from the matters of her crown. It's a simple, satisfying story. And it is a complete and utter fabrication. Now let's look at the evidence. Our first exhibit is not a love letter. It is an intelligence report, a dry-coded dispatch from the Spanish ambassador Guzman de Silva to his master King Philip II, written during the height of the French marriage negotiations. On the surface, de Silva reports on the Queen's emotional state, but read between the lines and a very different portrait emerges. I'm quoting a translated passage from his private ledger dated 1579. The Queen received the French envoy today. She spoke of the Duke's proposal with what appeared to be tears in her eyes, lamenting that her duty to her people warred so fiercely with the inclinations of her heart. She played the part of the tormented maiden to perfection. Yet in the same hour after the envoy had departed, I am reliably informed she met with her admirals to review new naval charts and discuss the provisioning of the fleet at Plymouth. She performs weakness for our French rivals, while she quietly sharpens her teeth. Your Majesty must not be deceived by the performance of a woman's heart. I begin to believe there is nothing in all of England so cold, so constant, and so calculating as the Queen's reason. Let's dissect this. This is our smoking gun. This is not the testimony of a flighty, emotional woman. This is the observation of a professional rival, a man paid to detect weakness, who instead found terrifying strength. De Silva's report exposes the game. Elizabeth wasn't being indecisive. She was running a sophisticated 2-pronged strategy. Prong 1, the public performance of romantic vulnerability to keep the French engaged and the Spanish off balance. Prong 2, the secret parallel process of military preparation. While her enemies were watching her heart, she was counting her cannons. Exhibit A doesn't just debunk the myth that she was ruled by emotion. It proves with chilling clarity that she had learned to use emotion as a weapon of state. Now, for the mechanism. Why was this elaborate performance necessary? Why not just pick a husband and be done with it? For that, we turn from paper to the map. Exhibit B is not a document, but a situation. The geopolitical reality of Europe in the late 16th century. Look at this map. This isn't a landscape of opportunities, it's a cage. On one side, you have the colossal, fanatically Catholic empire of Habsburg Spain, a global superpower with the finest army in the world and a navy that controls the Atlantic. On the other, the volatile, equally Catholic kingdom of Valois France, England's ancient enemy with a historic alliance with Scotland, England's back door. Now play the game. As queen, you have two choices. Marry into the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. The instant you do, France, citing your heresy and their ancient claim, has every reason to finance a Scottish invasion. From the north, plunging your kingdom into a holy war on two fronts. So you pivot. You marry into the French Valois dynasty. A sensible move, not at all. Now you have empowered the Spanish Navy, a leviathan at your doorstep, to launch its own crusade to liberate the good Catholics of England from a French-aligned heretic queen. It is a perfect trap, a checkmate from birth. Any move you make, any husband you choose, leads to invasion, civil war, and the end of your reign. So what do? An emotional ruler would have chosen a favorite and damned the consequences. An indecisive ruler would have dithered until one side forced her hand. Elizabeth did neither. She chose the third option, the only option. She chose no one. Her refusal to marry was not indecision. It was the only logical, rational, and strategic move available to her. It was a formal policy of radical neutrality. For decades, she kept both Spain and France trapped in a state of hopeful paralysis, each one terrified she would marry the other. Her virginity wasn't a personal failure. It was England's single greatest diplomatic shield. But the most compelling piece of evidence comes from the woman herself. If the official story is that she was a weak woman playing a man's game, we must turn to the moments she spoke for herself, not in flirtatious letters, but in the halls of power with the survival of her kingdom on the line. The year is 1588. The Spanish Armada, that great floating invasion, is massing off the coast. England is braced for annihilation. Elizabeth, a woman in her 50s, rides to Tilbury to address her troops. She is not supposed to be there. A woman has no place on a battlefield. But she goes, and she delivers the speech that will define her legend. Listen to these words. This is not the voice of a flighty, romantic queen. This is the voice of a commander. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too. Let's perform an autopsy on that sentence. It is a work of political genius. She begins by acknowledging their prejudice, the lens through which they all see her, the body of a weak and feeble woman. She validates their sexism. And then in the same breath, she pivots, she subverts it. She doesn't say she has the heart of a queen. She says she has the heart and stomach of a king. She is performing a sophisticated piece of political alchemy. She is invoking a medieval legal concept known as the king's two bodies. The idea that a monarch has a physical mortal body and a second immortal body politic that represents the state itself. What she is telling her soldiers and her enemies is that her physical gender is irrelevant. In her political body and the body that matters, she is a king. She is England. This is the ultimate counter-record. Her own words proving she was not a victim of her gender, but the absolute master of its political interpretation. So, we have dismantled the official story. The evidence is clear. She was not a flighty victim of her passions. She was a cold, calculating strategist who weaponized emotion, practiced a foreign policy of radical neutrality, and defined her own sovereignty in the face of a system designed to deny it. But if that is the truth, then what was the real curse? If it wasn't a secret lover or a broken heart, what was the true nature of her cursed chamber? It was the throne room of England itself. The curse was not a person. It was a system built by men for men that treated a queen's body as public property, a national resource to be debated, legislated, and bred for the good of the state. The curse was patriarchal expectation amplified by the systemic incentive of dynastic survival. Elizabeth's genius was in recognizing that she could not escape the chamber. The world would not allow it. So she did the only thing she could. She locked the doors from the inside, seized the keys, and turned her prison into a fortress. She turned the curse into a crown. We have stepped out of the cursed chamber. The air is clear again. The heat of the boiling pot has subsided, leaving behind only the cold, hard facts of the case. We have examined the evidence, debunked the official story, and exposed the brutal machinery of power that operated beneath the silk and ceremony of the Tudor court. All that remains is the verdict and the echo, the long, resonant echo that a life like Elizabeth's leaves in the corridors of history. So let's answer the question we posed at the very beginning. Were Elizabeth's lovers political weapons or personal weakness? The evidence is conclusive. The verdict is in. The endless parade of suitors, the whispers of secret romance, the rumors of a heart ruled by passion. It was all a smokescreen, a brilliant, deliberately constructed cloud of ink released by a master strategist to confuse her predators. Her supposed weakness, her femininity, her unmarried status was the greatest weapon in her arsenal. She took the system's obsession with her body and turned it into a grand international chess game where she was the only player who knew the rules. The rumors of her lovers were not a sign of her weakness. They were a testament to her strength. Her greatest political achievement was convincing the world that her calculated, ruthless strategy was nothing more than the emotional indecisiveness of a lonely woman. She hid her genius behind the very prejudice they used to attack her. It was the perfect crime. But every action, no matter how brilliant, has consequences. A life lived as a political calculation leaves behind a complex and often bloody inheritance. The ripple effects of Elizabeth's weaponized virginity did not end with her death. In many ways, that's when they truly began. First, the immediate paradox of her success. By refusing to produce an heir to solve her own political problems, she created an existential crisis for the kingdom she saved. Her death in 1603 left a power vacuum, filled not by an English heir, but by a Scottish king. James VI of Scotland became James I of England, uniting the two crowns and fundamentally altering the political DNA of the island. It was a solution born of desperation, an alien succession that sowed the seeds for the next century of conflict. A century that would see civil war, the execution of a king, and the birth of a republic. Elizabeth's perfectly executed strategy had one fatal flaw: it had no sequel. Second, by refusing to be shackled to a European dynasty, she untethered England from the continent. While Spain and France were bleeding themselves dry in endless land wars, Elizabeth's England was forced to look elsewhere. It looked to the sea. Her reign didn't just defeat the Spanish Armada, it gave birth to the Royal Navy as a dominant global force. It funded the pirates and explorers, the Drakes and the Raleighs, who laid the first bloody foundations of the British Empire. She traded a royal marriage bed for an oceanic empire, a choice that would define the next 300 years of world history. England's global destiny was forged in the cold, empty space of the Queen's bedchamber. And finally, the most enduring ripple of all the myth. Out of the political pragmatism of her reign, a powerful piece of national branding was born. She was not just a monarch, she became Gloriana the Virgin Queen. This wasn't just a nickname, it was a political theology. It fused her personal unmarried status with the identity of England itself. England became the virgin fortress, inviolable, independent, and uniquely favored by God. This potent myth became a cornerstone of English and later British nationalism. It was a story so powerful that it still shapes the nation's psychology today. The idea of a small defiant island standing alone against a hostile continent. And this brings us to our final human insight. We leave the grand sweep of history and return to the silence of the chamber. There's a saying we hold to here: history is a logbook of plausible mistakes made with perfect confidence. The powerful men around Elizabeth were supremely confident in their assessment a woman could not rule alone. A kingdom without a king was a plausible mistake, an error of nature that had to be corrected. Her own plausible mistake was proving them wrong, so completely, so utterly, that she broke the very model of monarchy. In her effort to survive, she created a system of one, a political singularity that could not be replicated. She became more than a monarch. She became a symbol, a myth, an idea. And the tragedy of this chamber is that in the process of becoming a legend, the woman, Elizabeth Tudor, was almost entirely consumed. She won her war. She defeated the system by mastering its rules and turning them against her jailers. But it was a victory that cost her everything a normal human life holds dear. She saved her kingdom, but in the process she erased herself, leaving behind only the cold, heavy crown and a legend that both conceals and reveals the terrible price of power. So what is your final verdict on the case of Elizabeth Tudor? Was she a cold-hearted genius who sacrificed her humanity for a crown? A master manipulator who played the game better than any man? Or was she history's loneliest survivor, a woman trapped by her own brilliant strategy, forever a queen, but never a person? Give us your verdict in the comments below. The historical record is closed, but the debate is not. And if you wish to unseal more of history's darkest secrets, hit subscribe and join us again as we unlock the next cursed chamber.